This is Houston, contact with a test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. End of test.
Discovery, Houston. Recommend vector transfer to the BFS.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
Gillespugin, sitting in front of the computer, is trying to type. He places both hands above the keyboard. He gives up, exhausted, and his hands drop into his lap. After resting for a time, he raises his hands again, only to drop them as before.
My definition of electronic literature is, I want to say stories, because I always associate stories with literature. And electronic means that there has been either some intervention in the authoring process, which involves digital technology, or in the delivery process, which has digital technology.
I try to recall winter as if it were yesterday, she says, but I do not signify one way or another. By 5 the sun sets and the afternoon melt freezes again across the blacktop into crystal octopi and palms of ice, rivers and continents beset by fear, and we walk out to the car, the snow moaning beneath our boots and the oaks exploding in series along the fence line on the horizon, the shrapnel settling like relics, the echoing thundering off far ice. This was the essence of wood, these fragments say, and this darkness is air. Poetry, she says, without emotion, one way or another. I wrote this in Michigan. I actually can remember the sound of, on freezing days, they may not have been oaks exploding, but the trees kind of popping off along the ridge. And I remember also having walked to my office and seen the afternoon melt freezing across the blacktop like crystal octopi. I'm having an incredible deja vu looking at the screen.
My definition of electronic literature would be any form of writing that is dynamic, meaning it can be collaborated on or edited or changed at will.
A check tablecloth laid in an isolated clearing. A bottle of red wine, 2 glasses, cheese, and bread. Walking the sound of water, white capped sound of water. A bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon set on a linen tablecloth. Cold water. Crystal goblets unexpectedly at midnight. Purple lupine on the hillside. Beside the Dempsey dumpster in town, walking down to the water where the homeless gathered. A flower dress, unexpected woodland events, white-capped spring water in winter. A bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon set on a linen tablecloth. Cold water. A flower dress, the smell of hops and honey, the smell of green grass, outflow of stones by the river, the smell of front door grass, under the eaves of the river, the cabin where we were working, the sound of water, white-capped mountains, purple lupine on the hillside, making love.
Electronic literature is forms of literature that make use of the computer or the network context to achieve effects that wouldn't be possible in print.
My birth takes place more than once in the plea of a bygone monster, from a muddy hole by corpse light, under the needle and under the pen. Or it took place not at all. But if I hope to tell a good story, I must leapfrog out of the muddle of my several births, to the day I parted for the last time with the author of my being and set out to write my own destiny.
So it might start with smell when that's possible in the future. At present it starts with image very dominantly and proceeds through text to sound in kind of a hierarchy, which I very much dislike. But I think the opportunities within that for interaction between those different senses and different means of generating stuff are just fantastic, particularly when we bring similar algorithms to bear on all of them. And we see their interactions both at the code, the sonic, the visual and the meaning level.
Electronic literature is the exploration of concepts beyond the ordinary using electronic means. And in traditional vision-based media, you have moving pictures, you have more traditional genres such as, printed text where things don't move around, but electronic literature involves exploring how we take concepts, how we perceive the world and ourselves, and trying to portray that using computation, using the specific processes that are unique to computers.
There are two main literary parents for me, for the fiction, and one of them is Thomas Pynchon, and Gravity's Rainbow, which is a novel which contains within it music hall numbers, popular songs, equation. There are no visible artworks, but there is a tremendous reference to the language of art and film and music and theater, and that was a mental model for me that the novel did not have to proceed in a linear fashion using only narrative.
Electronic literature for me is literature that takes advantage of the capacity of new media to alter the state of writing.
It's literature that engages its digitality.
I remember sitting in my office in Jackson, Michigan, in community college, and thinking, damn, I'm going to have to teach people how to read this thing.
Prepared, sugar is not a volume. In the glass doors, these circumstances, very clean that there is no seen variety, very clean that there is no pleasure, overly moist prepared, sugar is not a volume. Not having examined the room, grabbing at these rags, kindness, related to the vulture, and however, in varying sides and the door, for the sake, journey to use, last, they are double, for the sake, and rapid exploration requires most common classes, while the bodies, by the crowd, justified by appeal.
Electronic literature is two words that go together, resonate together. I suppose I would say it can be considered practice involving text that resonates with considerations of media, resonates with problems of media or platforms of media, taking advantage of platforms of media, as Amrit said, or for me, resonating with conceptual issues involving mediation and digitization of information communication.
So the first screen you see is this big image made in Mac Paint, if anyone knows what that is. It's just like a splash page, an image of the patchwork girl herself. Click through it to what is essentially a title page, Patchwork Girl or a Modern Monster by Mary Shelley and herself. And from here, you have links to 5 different sections of the text. The graveyard, the journal, the quilt, the story, and something called broken accents.
I think electronic literature is literature which requires a device to be read, and the device has to be electronic.
I worked with artist books. I was influenced by the works that I saw at Cramer Works, by Works in San Jose, which is by the art space at San Jose State that Stephen Moore curated. So I was in a field that was halfway between visual arts and halfway between writing. And of course performance art also that I was associated with, and the artist books. So those were interests that I continued with.
Electronic literature is machine-enabled stories, poems, images that are not available only as traditional print or sculptural events. They're mediated by machines, and they don't exist in a format that the other arts have traditionally taken.
Boxes, raising the dirt, only several colors. Tall the one cluster away, variety each a method, package of seeds, the several not
Stone
in rows.
especially smooth, location chip it down. Magnify the bottom, darting and then habitual shadow, scene bending.
We're all moving toward storytelling in digital space,
And some of the most interesting experiments that are happening are in electronic literature.
You're coming out of a Dadaist tradition of saying there's something beyond this, and I'm going to rearrange this stuff and find other layers beyond the visible, or make other layers.
I think electronic literature is digital-born literature that would not exist otherwise than by mediation through a computer.
Electronic literature is the exploration of how we can tell stories with the augmentation of technology. So what technology makes possible in our storytelling palette. I'm particularly thinking about kind of the networked and connective tissues of literature and storytelling and the ways that we realize those through the technologies we already use all the time, particularly on the web.
The lack of clear signals isn't an attempt to vex you, rather an invitation to read either inquisitively or playfully and also at depth. Click on words that interest you or invite you.
Electronic literature can be a number of things. It's interactive. It has to do with words and images.
I go in and out of what to call myself. I still say different things. But within the community, I create electronic literature, which I would call poetic narrative. So I'm a poet who works with narrative.
I think the day that comes that we don't actually distinguish it as electronic literature is the day that we finally, would be the day that, we don't have to ask questions like that.
An otherworldly glass of beer.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the live stream Traversal of Kathryn Cramer's In Small and Large Pieces, hosted by the Electronic Literature Lab at Washington State University, Vancouver. I'm Astrid Enslin, research affiliate of the lab and hypertext scholar. With me remotely are Kathryn Cramer, Mariusz Pisarski, and Dini Grieger, the director of the lab, who will be operating the computer directly from the lab. Kathryn will be guiding Dini remotely via Zoom while she reads from Dini's computer screen via YouTube. I'll be scanning the chat for questions throughout, and Kathryn will be taking navigation suggestions from the audience about which links to choose. So this is something she used to do back then in the 90s when she went for readings, and so we want to reconstruct this experience a little bit for the audience here. There is also a fair amount of lag in the YouTube transmission, which we noticed, and we apologize for that, but we'll try and bridge these gaps by taking questions from the audience and by adding some additional information about the work and about Kathryn's life and involvement with Eastgate, and we'll also be editing out any silent periods. For the playthrough, we'll be using the 3.5-inch floppy disk version of a Mac Classic 2 running system software 7.1, which was released in October 1991 and sold through September 1993. Following the performance, there will be a Q&A with Kathryn, Mariusz, Dini, and myself. And as a participant in the event, you'll be able to post questions at the end as well in the YouTube chat to the author about her work, and she will then respond in the Q&A. Just a few words about the work itself. In Small and Large Pieces is a short poetic hypertext fiction, Kathryn Cramer's first hypertext fiction, as she says in the preface, and it was originally published in issue 1.3, summer 1994, of the Eastgate Quarterly Review of Hypertext. It came bundled with Kathy Mack's Unnatural Habitats, a work that we also have on our Traversal schedule for this spring. And In Small and Large Pieces was originally produced with story space 1.08 and used 875 kilobytes. It's a remarkably large work in terms of links. So it's got 513 spaces or lexias and 2,625 links. So that makes it the second highest link to note ratio ever published by Eastgate, only topped by Victory Garden. So it's very densely linked, almost like embroidery, as Kathryn calls it. So that's amazing. I mean, she'll hopefully show us a little bit about just how that looks for the reader. The work was shipped on 3.5-inch floppy disk and later on CD-ROM. On the Eastgate catalog, it is promoted as dark fantasy and postmodern through the looking glass. And indeed, the work aligns with numerous cross-media remediations of Lewis Carroll's original book. In particular, the shattered mirror becomes a symbol of obsessive fragmentation and the shattered self, according to the original blurb. In my forthcoming book, Pre-Web Digital Publishing and the Lore of Electronic Literature, which is out later this year with Cambridge University Press, I dedicate an entire chapter to this work, and I weave in biographical information given by Kathryn herself about how events in her own life folded into the narrative, both thematically and formally. She will probably tell us a bit more about that later in the Traversal as well. And it's also important to mention, and she may also expand on that she was editor. She had a seminal role at Eastgate as editor and graphic designer between 1993 and 95. Just for information, Deanie and her team have published an extensive analysis of this work in Rebooting Electronic Literature Volume 2, 2019. Part of it is a traversal of this work performed by Will Lewers in December 2018, which can be accessed on YouTube and Vimeo. And it'll be really interesting to see how the two readings intersect and how Kathryn will demystify some of the riddles posed by this particular edition. For example, in this traversal, we will see the original fonts intended by Kathryn, while the earlier recording did not have these fonts loaded into the system folder. So at this point, I just want to acknowledge the contributions of the many staff members of the lab and faculty members of the Creative Media and Digital Culture program who have made this event possible. Deanie Grieger, who founded and directs the lab, has made it available to scholars wishing to use its many resources for the purpose of study. Greg Philbrook, the lab and program's tech guru, is handling YouTube Live and OBS. Holly Slocum, the lab's project manager, is overseeing the project and created the art associated with the event. Kathleen Zoller, the lab undergraduate researcher, is managing social media posting on Twitter. Dr. John Barber is handling the sound production, and Professor David Alonso is taking care of post-production editing of the video capture. I will also add that the video capture from today's traversal will be edited and placed on the lab's Vimeo channel and added to the lab's annual publication, Rebooting Electronic Literature, including an essay written by myself that will accompany the entire chapter in Rebooting. So, without further delay, let's delve right in. Let's begin the traversal. So, Kathryn, I will turn it over to you at this point.
Yeah, so I think it's been about 25 years, which is to say a quarter century since I've done a reading from this work. I used to do a lot of them, and I had an absolute blast while doing it. And the way I would do it back in prehistoric time was that I would mostly let the audience choose the links to follow. Now given that the time delay is like we're talking to the moon in terms of what I see on the screen, we're going to do the best we can in terms of that. We do have certain places we want to get to and so on, but I encourage you to put in the chat links that you want to see followed or ideas you have about what, places that might be interesting to go. So, because even if the time is asynchronous, we might be able to follow up on some of those at the end. But I encourage you to be curious about what links are there, because a lot of these pages are very heavily linked. So, and Small and Large Pieces took 1.5 years to write. It became obsolete in about a year, it was published right before the CD-ROM revolution. And I did a fair amount of going to science fiction conventions with it. I also did, in 1995, I drove across the country and stopped at bookstores and did various events and sort of did a hypertext tour. And I actually stopped in and stayed with Dina Larson in Boulder, Colorado at that point. on that trip. So I used to, it was a very engaged with the public, with audiences kind of thing. So we're going to try to recreate that despite the challenges of Zoom and the YouTube lag. And so here we have, first of all, we're going to start with this head quote. And I want to dwell on this a little bit because I think it has a lot to do with how we read now. And I liked this quote a lot at the time, but I think in terms of, the world where we get up in the morning and get our news from Twitter, I think we can see something about how our ideas about reading have changed. And this is a quote from E.M. Forster's aspects of the novel. And I think he was talking about Gertrude Stein, probably her novel, The Making of Americans. And what he has to say is, she wants to abolish this whole aspect of story, this sequence in chronology, and my heart goes out to her. She cannot do it without abolishing the sequence between the sentences. But this is not effective unless the order of the words in the sentences is also abolished, which in turn entails the abolition of the order of the letters and sounds in the words. And now she is over the precipice. Okay. Next page.
So Kathryn, you deal with the idea of reversed order quite a lot, right? So this will come up in a moment, right?
That's a good point, and I want to talk about this art in a minute. So let's leave the screen. I first wrote the very earliest draft of this for a fairy tale anthology that Ellen Datlow was soliciting stories for. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, I think. And I had just recently worked at the Virginia Kid Literary Agency. And I also was an anthologist, and Ellen was sort of one of my peers as anthologists. And I wrote it, and I was pleased with it, and I sent it off to her. And then about a week later, I woke up and realized, and thought, this story would be a lot better if I took all of the paragraphs and put them in reverse order. And so I said, Ellen, I want my story back. And so I withdrew it. And then I started doing that. And then later, I found out about Story Space and Eastgate Systems, and I said, I have the perfect thing to use this on. So I had already put them in reverse order before I knew about Story Space, but I had withdrawn it from publication so I could do that. Anyway, so here we have this art. And when we were talking before, there was some interest in what this is. That's a self-portrait and a butterfly and a thing I did in Mac Paint that looks like a doorway. And a thing to understand is that this is from the era where the screens were very small and the pixels were black and white, or at least they were when I started working on it. And so I kind of knew where every pixel on that page was. And so I bought I think a Logitech hand scanner, and I ran it over a picture of my face, which is where I got that. And then I had a butterfly, an actual butterfly that was actually missing a wing. And I think I may have put a piece of glass on it, and I scanned it in. And then the art was done in with paint. And there are a few links on here. And I'm going to say along the way, there are really a lot of links on most pages. But I want to sort of get you through the front hall into this work before we go into total chaos and anarchy. So we're going to go past these links and through a few conventions of the book into the actual story. And then we'll get lost.
Kathryn, just very briefly, Dina Larson is here, and
hi,
she
Dina.
says, yeah, she would like to see hit and command just on this, cover art, just so that people can see how it's linked.
Actually, let's try to do that as we go along. But because of the lag issue, maybe people could jot down what they want to know about, so that if we don't get the timing right, if they could post in the chat pages they want to see that from, we can circle back around if we don't get because the lag is substantial, as you can see. Okay, so here I am observing the conventions of the book. We have a table of contents. That's my eye. And there are chapter titles: The Art of Living Backwards, Injury and Breakage, Anna, Phantom Lies, The Unified Parents, Scrambled Eggs, and a title I can't read because a piece of infrastructure or the interface is in the way. And then in the bottom corner, it looks like there's a link to my poetry collection. And yes, there is my poetry in this, and we will see some. So, okay, we can continue from here. I think we want to go to the effective, actually, can you show Dan, well, this just has the links we can see. Yes, the mirror shattered. So let's click on the effective living backwards, because we're going in the front door here. Chapter 1, the effective living backwards, and this also has subheadings for screens. Another moment in the mirror. I remember. You saw what happened. All three of them. You chased me. You broke it, and the encyclopedia. And let's go to another moment, and then we'll figure out where to go. Nice long way. In another moment, Anna was gone. This was the line that was the last line when I sent it to Owen Bradlow.
And it recurs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now there was no one in the mirror, only her bedroom with no one there. And certainly she was beginning to melt away, just like a bright silvery mist. And those of you who obsessively read Through the Looking Glass at some point will recognize some of the phrases in that passage. In the mirror, she saw Martin leave the room, and where her own reflection should have been, she saw a face with blue eyes. Martin. I'm gonna let you guys click this. I'll tell you if I have a particular one that I want to go to. So just click away.
Oh yeah.
That's my other eye. And some fun with McPaint. When shard-like looking in the mirror.
Yeah, thank you for those links. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, all of those go places, and it's as I think the word embroidery came up earlier. I used to, as I say, it took about 1.5 years to write this, and at the time I was working on it, I was working in some literary agencies, and so I would sit on the train, and the way some people knit on public transportation, I would make links on this hypertext. Their relationship was one of passionate opposition, not one of intimate sharing.
Should we say something about the main characters at this point, Kathryn?
Okay, there's a central character who's essentially an author surrogate, surprise, surprise, named Anna, and she has a younger sister named Annabelle, and then a brother named Martin, and then there are their parents. And I think she has a boyfriend in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Anna's parents were under an enchantment, which led, she thought, to all their problems. I would click on enchantment here, but Mother, or maybe her father, had forgotten to write the thank you note to Dad's Aunt Melba for a cheap gift she'd sent for Christmas 7 years before. And Melba had finally lost her temper. Maybe I would click on temper or cheap or gift. But I think this page is probably pretty heavily linked. Anna had only met her once, Thanksgiving, when she was 6. Aunt Melba was a tall, skinny woman with only one arm, a black patch over her left arm, eye, and almost no hair. She had all the money in the family. Everybody said that Aunt Melba was a real old witch. Finally, Anna understood what was for real. That it was for real. I'm going to read that again for the video version. Anna had only met her once, Thanksgiving, when she was 6. Oh well. Which job, said Annabelle. Are there 4 links on this page? I'm curious. I think there probably are. I would click on, okay. Anna shrugged. They both put on their makeup in the bathroom. Annabelle chewed on her lower lip and stared into the mirror for a long time. She smeared on beige foundation covering the unusual pinkness of her cheeks and chin. As Anna helped Annabelle curl her hair, she accidentally burned her cheek with the curling iron. I did that once by accident, but not to my sister. That's a visceral moment that comes from real life.
Yeah.
They ate scrambled eggs together. Momentarily, as they ate, the first orange rays cast a shadow of jagged mountains upon the surface of the lake. Jagged shadows or lake would be my... Anna could never make out, thinking about it afterwards, how it was that they began. Together, they made artificial Siamese twins. The rule of construction was that a piece of mother must always connect to a piece of father, and never to another piece of mother, and vice versa. This way, her parents would never fall apart again. The plan succeeded beautifully, although the resulting unified parent was difficult to clothe.
Now, this is a very important part of the narrative, right, Kathryn?
Yes.
My personal favorite, and anyone who's seen this advertised on Twitter will have noted that as a reference to the unified parent. So we will probably get there. It's the monster.
I'll say in passing, that's kind of a physics joke in that my father was the guy at the University of Washington that the university would send people to when they came with their grand unified theory of physics or their perpetual motion machine, because he could always explain pretty directly and briefly and calmly why their theory was wrong, and why they weren't going to solve the energy crisis with their invention. So the grand unified thing was something that came up over dinner. So the grand unified parent, the teenager solving her problems by making a grand unified parent is got a sort of buried physics joke. It was addressed to me, Martin J. Miller. I was opening my own mail, and you came up behind me and punched me. She did punch him, but who else had there been to keep order? Punched or order or opening. Opening would be good. But any of these. You broke my mirror, she said, bursting into angry tears. She could hear Annabelle beginning to cry out of sympathy or perhaps confusion. Competing loud radios in several rooms were playing on different stations, so she couldn't quite tell where Annabelle was. Confusion would be an interesting one. Or mirror would be okay. The full-length mirror on Anna, strike that one over. The full-length mirror on Anna's closet door lay in shards and fragments upon the plush purple bedroom rug, reflecting a blue eye and an ear here, a green eye and a nose there, the images of Martin and Anna indiscriminately commingled. No.
Yeah, the mirror is key, and so is the idea of, intersplicing, like interweaving different characters and identities, so that it's not even entirely sure whether there are, to me anyway, whether there are three separate characters.
Well, that is an interesting question. Just how many characters are there? And to that point, there was a torso which moved in and out as though breathing, although there were no passages for air. Two pieces and a foot for each leg, with two pieces and a hand for each arm, and of course a head and neck, which were all one piece. The hard part was the fingers and toes.
A lot of people will be thinking of Patchwork Girl right now, right? So here is the theme.
Yeah, this is pre-Patchwork Girl. But I think Shelley Jackson had it in draft, and so I think we were working in parallel on similar themes at the time.
Did you actually know of each other's work?
I have only ever read a draft of Patchwork Girl while I was working at Eastgate. I've never seen the whole thing because I left the company before it was published and didn't happen to circle back. So I have known of it, and what I saw was not the finished draft. So.
And she was not aware of yours, do you think?
I have no idea. I don't think I've ever actually had a conversation with her. I do have a certain, I mean, in addition to the Eastscape people, I have a certain completely other set of friends that know her. It was really funny to be at a friend's house, and it turned out they had a Shelley Jackson painting on their wall in their living room because she was a friend of theirs. But so I think we skipped past one. Was there was something on the screen that I didn't read, or?
Yeah, I think so too. Can we go back one?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, this is actually part of a typical story space reading experience, the skipping.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a way in which it didn't matter that we skipped one, because this is shattered and all over the floor, and you're really intended to be able to make sense of this anarchy.
Yeah.
She took Annabelle by the hand, and they went to the master bedroom, and she locked the door. After what Martin had done to Annabelle, she didn't dare leave her out there. Dare would be a good one. Hand or dare? Annabelle would just have to watch. Well, you know, I mean, I guess I am re-encountering it. I think the last time I encountered this text was 5 years ago, and if I were my therapist, I would be asking, why did you laugh then? Was that funny or not? And actually, that page is not funny, and I laughed anyway. So a new difficulty came into Anna's head. It was unfortunate that Martin had adopted his new strategy. She would fix him, though. And there was a certain poetic justice in what she was about to do. Martin didn't come back, which was the relief. Now, I don't remember what she's doing at this point. I've seen this so long, so I'll just have to find out.
Dina Larson is asking, I wonder if Kathryn could also address the implicit pieces. There are many invisible pieces referred to, for instance, after what Martin had done. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I believe that you do, if you read all the Lexia, find out what Martin had, I remember what Martin had done, yes. That would be a spoiler, but there were a lot of, there's a lot of things to encounter here, and all of the narrative, plot tickets, as it were, I think do pay off. She drew inspiration from the patchwork quilt on the bed. And since Annabelle was going to have to watch anyway, she could help. And since this would be a complex geometric operation, Anna would need help. Again, one that I want to laugh at. It's actually not funny.
Yeah, here's the quilt. People are putting a lot of metaphors in the chat. Yes, absolutely.
And there is a quilt. There is literally me.
Yeah.
With in front of a quilt that I actually own. And I believe the text that's covered, it says, "The jaws that bite, the claws that catch," which should be a familiar phrase to those who are Alice in Wonderland obsessed, like me.
There are references to the Cheshire Cat, right? We read about whiskers every now and again, but in all the wrong places.
That actually, the whiskers quote, the mention of whiskers is in the original Through the Looking Glass.
Yeah.
Later, Anna sat in the red velvet chair, the phone on the floor by her feet, next to the glass-doored bookcase where the dictionaries and encyclopedias were kept, weeping and staring at her reflection in the glass and writing poetry.
So the encyclopedia, right? I remember you were telling me that you remember two things from your actual life, that you were either the one, actually you were one throwing, but also the one jumping, right?
Let's leave that for later, because if we don't get to that scene, I'll talk about it. But that's a pivotal scene we haven't got to.
Awesome.
So I think now we're encountering our first poem. Pigeons walk like wind-up toys, wrapped for birthdays, full of joys. Tear the paper, turn the key. Watch the pigeons follow me. So what do you want to do with that? Your voice changes completely when you're talking to your brother, said Carl. She felt embarrassed that he'd heard her yelling. This was not the image she wanted to project. She just wanted to disappear. I guess disappear is the link. I'm assuming there's a link there. Yeah, I would click on disappear. Ha ha ha. Moment, Anna was gone. What were the links there again? Let me see what those are. Did I have two on just on the NN?
I think there were 4.
Yeah, there were 4 of them, but could you hold that down because I want to see what those are. Oh, here we go. It's fine. Now, okay, now we're back to Carl. Well, just pick some place from here. It doesn't matter. Just click on a link on this page. Okay, the NN. Yeah, click on the NN. Oh, actually, yeah. Also, another interesting thing here is that this, rather than having links on words, it's got links on parts of words, which is to say, it's breaking the lexia down into smaller pieces and taking, you know, finding other things in there that are not grammatically related. Go away, she said. She leapt off the counter and pushing against the door with her shoulder, pulled the drawer back out. She had tried to close it, but he had the knife blade between the door and the jamb so it wouldn't close. Knife blade's pretty tempting. She picked up a large dagger-shaped piece of glass, holding it carefully so as not to touch the edges, looking at her reflection. Edges or reflection would be my preference, but I mean, it's also fine with me if you follow somebody else's suggestion from the chat. Lay in shards and fragments. And pick anything. She got the mail. The only thing for her was the magazine from American Atheists. Her mother had gotten something from the Engineering Society addressed to Mr. N.W. Miller. Anna smirked. Her mother's name was Norma. Her maternal grandfather had wanted to name his daughter Norman after himself. There's a naming thing of endlessly recycled names that also goes on here. And also, my mother is named Pauline. Guess what her father's name was? I actually know what I would have been named were I a boy. Because my grandfather was John Gleason Cramer, and my father was John Gleason Cramer, and my younger brother is John Gleason Cramer. Again, nestled in the comfortable chair under the yellow incandescence of the reading lamp, Anna flipped through her magazine. It contained several bad poems about atheism. So she tried to write a poem about the non-existence of God in hopes that they might publish it. The American Atheist magazine did actually have bad poetry in it. I think this is actually, I no longer remember what was in there, but I'm pretty sure I was describing it accurately, and I did have a subscription. You can only talk about conventional religion. You say that it's stupid for women to burn their bras. I'm talking about atheism. I affirmatively believe in a non-existence of God. I'm talking about the natural state of humanity ruled by gynarchy. I'm looking at the title of that, the disjunction between the title and the content of that poem is really interesting. The poem didn't seem to be going anywhere in particular, so she went back to writing erotic poetry instead. Still nestled. What are the links on that page? Oh, yeah, so I guess, yeah, sure, let's go. The Mona Lisa has been raped, collected poems by Anna Miller, and it has a table of contents for the poems.
So this is the poetry basement, right, Kathryn?
Yeah, I tried to do a lot with the look and feel of this, and because I don't find the inner look of story space documents particularly attractive from a readerly standpoint, or from shall we say book design standpoint. I like story space a lot as a writing environment, but I didn't want to go that far. So the actual underlying structure here is there's a kind of conventions of the book. There is the original text of the short story that I wrote and sent to Ellen Gatlow with all the pieces chopped up and put in reverse order that goes sequentially through the reverse order and begins and ends on the same line. And then there's fragmented parts of those that are chopped up more. And so there's a couple of layers, I think. I haven't seen this in many years, but and then under at a lower level of the structure, there is the poetry collection. And I think I'm going to pause here and confess this is actually poetry I wrote as a teenager between, I think, ages 15 and 17. And the single strangest moment from the Traversal that was done 2 years ago, that when I watched it, was watching a middle-aged professor puzzling over the meaning of poetry I wrote when I was 15, that I put into this form when I was like 32, 35, something like that, and at age 58. I mean, just plain the disjunction in time and the sort of reconfiguration of things and reframing of things, and him wondering whether this was the character writing it or me writing it, and so on. It was a really interesting psychological experience that I also really enjoyed. But that contextualization and recontextualization was really fascinating. I don't remember which ones are good, but I would say click on mirror because we have a mirror theme going here. Oh, also, I guess I'll add while we're waiting for the lag, that when I was the age when I wrote this stuff, I used to write really, really a lot of poetry, and then I would burn it. And these are the ones that survived that experience. I mean, I did not put every last poem I wrote as a teenager in here, just the ones I thought were at least relatively good or at least fit the narrative. The children of the wind have golden hair and eyes. Their delicate bodies sway gracefully in their minds. They are lost to man. When he reaches out, all he touches is flesh. The mind wears a mask for protection. She tells him of beauty. I'll show you beauty, he says, from under the damp sheets, forgetting she has a mind. I am a child of the wind. Am I a child of the wind? I have golden hair and eyes. My delicate body sways, but only in my mind. I am only another body with makeup mask for protection. My golden eyes try not to look too deeply into the mirror. And there are links there, and you can click on some. We've got some plot points to get to, so I don't want to spend too long in the poetry basement. There is no way out. Now I'm trying to remember, why is that one in a different font? And that would not be accidental, and that's got to be in the original. And I'm wondering that, and I don't know the answer to it. The vorpal blade went snicker snack. Now that's in italics because it's literally from Through the Looking Glass. Preceded by Alexia that says 1, 2, 1, 2, and through. The vorpal blade went snicker snack. At first she could still hear arguing, but after a while noise seemed to gradually die away until all was dead silence. And Anna lifted up her head in some alarm. The two girls listened at the bedroom door, but could hear only a dull murmuring. So, do we vote for dead?
Yeah, sure.
And now she's over the precipice.
So the small and large pieces, right? They come in here and there. So you take snippets from quotes and from other pieces and weave them.
Yeah, no, there is intentionally broken prose, both from Ian Forster from Through the Looking Glass, and I think from some other places that's in here, broken into, as it were, in small and large pieces. The title actually came from the same period of time, maybe a little bit earlier than the part of my adolescence where I wrote this poetry, maybe a couple of years earlier, where we had a babysitter who was supposed to keep us from fighting in the afternoon, which mostly didn't work. Somehow a mirror had gotten broken, and he left on the kitchen table a note from my parents saying, there is a mirror downstairs that is in small and large pieces.
There you go.
So that's where the title came from. And I fell on the ice in December and shattered my elbow and had I've been stitched back together here, and spent the last 3 months taking a lot of hard drugs, going through brutal physical therapy. It was like I have been referring to what happened to my elbow as it was shattered in small and large pieces. So I guess this sort of metaphor sticks with me.
Yeah.
He grabbed her arm and gave her a shove towards the back door. Anna said nothing, pulled away. She left through the front door, afraid of meeting Annabelle if she went out the back. I don't remember what happens next there. I don't remember why she's afraid of meeting Annabelle. That's an interesting moment.
Oh, this is great, actually. We can move on to the Lexia from here, right, Marius?
Chapter 3, Anna Phantom-wise. Dream, but is it what? And Anna, it seems very pretty. Dream, but is it what? Life? Gleam golden, the lingering stream, the down drifting, ever dies. Brother is dreaming, by go days as dreaming. Why they wonderland, a near nestle shell, loving ear and eye eager. Here to tail the children too, eyes walking by, seen never skies, under moving Anna, phantom wise, her haunts he still. her to seemed it so. Boy slain, how frost's autumn, die, boys little and fade echoes. Sky sunny, pale, long. Here to scream, simple, pleased, ear willing and eye eager. Nestle, that 3 children die that evening on dreamily onward, lingering sky sunny beneath a hand. That's hard to read, but fun. And yes, it is written backwards, yes. I used to practice that one, so I could go through it very, very fluently.
Here we go.
And Anna as autumn beneath boys, brother, but I, children, days, dies, down, dreamily, dreaming, drifting, eager ear, echoes of evening, eyes, fade, frost, gleam, golden hand, has haunts, he'll hear her, in it is life, lingering, little long, loving, moving near, nestle, never onwards paled, phantom-wise, pleased, scream, seen, shell, simple skies, sky, slain, still stream, sunny, tale, that thee, and thee there, they, 3, 2, under, waking, what, willing, wonderland yet, or so it seemed to her. Be a good moment for, and now she is over the precipice. I want to see the Lexi again. Okay, there we go. It seems very pretty, she said when she had finished it. but it is rather hard to understand. Understand would be my natural click, but go anywhere.
Oh, thanks for that. I was just going to suggest we go to chapter 4.
Okay. Chapter 4, the unified parent. Why don't we hit return through this section?
Yeah, let's do that. That's the default path.
Yeah, that's the. I think we do get the major, many of the more surreal events in this section.
Are you going to read this section, or should I just hit?
Are
you going to read these?
Oh, actually, I could read. Those are page titles.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'd say just hit return. I mean, I suppose I could read it as a poem, but
it does sound like a poem.
Anna came in the back, brutality and comfort. Okay, there we go. Anna came in the back door and found the newspaper, and the blood, of course, and a small gray white lump with a toenail attached. Anna had come to clean up the trail Annabelle left when she ran to her room. She was, as Anna expected, under her bed. Between gasping sobs, Annabelle said that he hadn't said why he'd done it. Anna had her suspicions. I'll just hit return on this. Anna got some ice, some Band-Aids, and her sewing kit. And after she sewed the tip of the toe back on, she got a bucket of cold water and cleaned up the blood. What else could be done? She would have to fix him later. In situations like this, brutality and comfort become one and the same. I think the links on this one are brutality and comfort, although I don't remember if there's more than that. But I think we're heading on a narrative line here. Once, when he had still been a bit smaller than her, she'd had to force her finger down her throat to make him throw up, and then force-fed him lumps of charcoal from the fireplace. I do wonder at what point I should stop at each one and say, no, that didn't happen, and nobody cut off anybody's toes, because this is a deeply autobiographical book. There's some brutal stuff in here, and most of that didn't happen.
Let's just leave that to people's imagination.
Well, I was like, well, we'd gone through a couple of these things. I felt like I should say something. One Sunday morning, he'd eaten all the aspirin and Sudafed in the house and a few antihistamines and washed it all down with a water glass of Jack Daniels. Now, just one note about the Lexia titles. I think there may be longer versions of these that have more text on the page. So when it says brutality and comfort 3 and 4, it's possible there are shorter versions or longer versions that are further up the hierarchy, because it starts out with the text and then there's smaller versions of the text and smaller versions of the text, etc. So just a note about the section titles. Some of these are pieces of large fragments of things that have a life elsewhere. Their mother had been lying in the sun in the living room rug reading the comics. Anna had been sitting in the red velvet chair reading the editorial page. He handed their mother a note. I'm going to open a ginger ale. Mrs. Miller ran into the bedroom. Martin sat on the sofa with his hands folded in his lap with a blank expression on his face. Anna saw the note. She read it. It explained what he'd taken. She went to her parents' bedrooms to find out what they were going to do. She listened at the door. It was quiet. It was very quiet. She knocked on the door. No one answered. She opened the door. Her parents were there in two heaps. They had come apart like they always did in crises. For every parent, there was a torso moving in and out as though breathing, though there were no passages for air, 2 pieces and a foot for each leg, 2 pieces and a hand for each arm, and of course a head and neck, which were all one piece. The hard part was the fingers and toes. She had to sort them into the proper order and distinguish the right ones from the left.
Does sound like patchwork again, and in small and large pieces were written at the same time, but maybe even at the same desk, looking at this.
But before she did anything about parental disintegration, she had to deal with her brother's suicide attempt. The pieces would keep. They had shiny new skin covering all their stumps, and it would be at least 2 hours before they began to turn blue for lack of oxygen. And you know, we're now at the point where I'm taking a long pause so I get a sense of where we're going, because it was getting a little intense for me. She grabbed him by the collar and by the hair and dragged him into the bathroom. She had read about someone who had swallowed half a bottle of sleeping pills and had been made to throw up and was given charcoal in the emergency room. Step 1 then was to get him to throw up. She tried to bite her finger as she forced it. He tried to bite her finger as she forced it down his throat. But she banged his head against the toilet seat and he submitted.
So shall we try and navigate to the You Will Lexia at some point? Because we have 8 minutes left on the schedule.
Why don't you take us to a few favorites?
Yeah. So Dini, you could either go back to the chapter overview and then follow chapter 4 and then a link to the horror, and then you could try that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about this, which I think is probably common with the other hypertext that has dismemberment themes, which is a common hypertext theme, is the collision of humor and horror. And this is a very interesting experience for me, because it's like I remember how much fun it was to read this, and I'm still having fun even when I'm like, okay, I have to scan this one before I read it out loud. But it is also a very, there's a real humor and horror and something about the fact that it's surreal gives it a higher voltage than if it was purely naturalistic.
It's still very uncanny. I felt the uncanny all the way through. So if you want to navigate just by default now, by return.
I'm going to resume reading them out loud, and so read this, and then you navigate so that we get through the ones that you want. The horror of that moment, he went on, I shall never, never forget. Which is another, I think this whole Lexia may be through the looking glass. You will, though, she said, if you don't make a note of it. The unified parent scuttled spider-like into the kitchen and made itself cups of tea. The girls left the room and the parent locked the door behind them. Anna and Annabelle went to the kitchen where Anna read to her sister from through the looking glass. One, two, and one, two, and through and through. The vorpal sword went snicker. The vorpal blade went snicker.
So Dina is just saying this is a piece that truly exemplifies the erotic nature of hypertext. Readers pull pieces together, characters pull parents together, and pieces fall apart again. Yes, when you go exploring into the basement.
At first they could still hear arguing, but after a while the noise seemed to gradually die away until all was dead silence. And Anna lifted up her head in some alarm. The two girls listened at the bedroom door, but could only hear a dull murmuring. This is one we've been to before. Go around outside and look in the bedroom window, said Anna. I'll stand guard out here. After a few minutes, Annabelle returned.
So Kathryn, we have a few minutes left. Did you want us to reach the end, or do you just want to leave it?
I'll be a spoiler until they're watching the news, she said. I'll be a spoiler and tell you the last line. In another moment, Anna was gone. Begins and ends on the same line. I guess I want to leave some room for audience engagement, because part of the way I've done this is sort of a back and forth with the audience. So do you have questions, comments, things?
I mean, we still have about 30 minutes just Q&A,
okay,
right?
So we're not really
it's just reading time.
Okay, yeah. So, are there? I mean, I think from my perspective, I think we've covered enough of it, but we could do more if you want. Or I think let's check to the audience stuff. Are there particular links that people wanted followed, or things they wanted that they'd said in the chat that they wanted to go to that we didn't get to?
So I have a question about the fonts. Why these fonts? Why Futura and Palatino?
Okay, so in the Mac universe of that era, first of all, we were sending them out on floppy disks, and yes, they had the Escape fonts that were going to be installed, etc. But essentially, there was a very limited range of fonts that were likely to be on someone's machine, so one had to design it with the idea of the possibility that they were not going to install the fonts that came with it. And so the general choice was to use fonts that were on most Macs at the time, and I picked the ones that I liked best and worked fairly hard on the type design, in as much as there was type design that could be done. So why these fonts in particular is because there was very little design control one could exert, but I had designed it rather than letting it just sort of happen. So a lot of time, this isn't quite representing things, but the proportions on the screen we talked about beforehand, that some of them, it looks like it's got a narrower parameter or something, or is making the fonts bigger, but we couldn't solve that. But more or less, this is what I wanted it to look like. One other thing I'll say is there are a few moments of color.
Yeah.
For example, on the screenshot behind Astrid, which has the title in the wrong font, but my name in the correct font, because that's a bitmap. That's actually a hand-cut rubber stamp that I hand-cut. You'll notice that the initial caps and the main title are blue, and the K in my name is red. And this is just at the point where color screens on Macintoshes had just come in, or were fairly scarce, but they were out there. So it was kind of a I know you might have a color screen.
Yeah.
Actually, can I come in here? Is there a way of showing the cover page? I don't think we've shown that
Behind your head.
long enough. Yeah, but they can only see that when I'm talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, actually, the one that's actually on this document, on the document in there has it in, was it Arial? I know that the serif font was Palatino. I don't remember what the other one was, either Helvetica or Arial. The same one the word scrambled eggs is in. Now, what the hit return to continue is part of the story space interface, and that had to be there. So I didn't have any choice of that. And because the Eastgate Systems Watertown, Massachusetts logo needed to be there, so that needed to be there. So those are the default elements that would be on that page, no matter what it was. If it was published by Eastgate, published in that way, and the rest of it was designed. As I said, my name, the by Kathryn Cramer, is a bitmap of a hand-cut rubber stamp, and the other is, and I think there was a reason why the title needed to be not a bitmap, but actually text. And I don't remember what that reason was, but I have a faint recollection that I would have preferred to have the title something where it was a bitmap, but we did it that way for a reason. One of the things about this is that I wrote on this for 6 or 8 months before I went to work for Eastgate, but then while I was finishing it, I think the second half of the time, I actually worked at the company. I was, Mark was upstairs, and we were in a big white house in Watertown, Massachusetts, and Mark's office was upstairs, and my office was downstairs. And my office was also where the shrink wrapping of the products were. And I completely redesigned the packaging. It had been these plastic binders, and I persuaded, well, I mean, I don't know. I don't remember exactly whether I persuaded Mark or whether I merely designed the replacement for the black plastic binders, but I was the designer behind the shift from the plastic binders to the cardboard, more book-like design. And I did all of the cover design for in small and large pieces, including the weird cover art, and also the type design for how the whole standard package looked after that. So
sorry, go ahead.
You would wanted to see the title page, and I still see scrambled eggs on the screen.
Yeah, me too. While we're waiting for that,
I can't do.
Do you remember when exactly the change happened from vinyl to cardboard in the folios?
93 or 94. I mean, small and large pieces came out in 94.
Yeah.
And mine was one of the first ones, but I mean, I worked out a lot of the type design for the change in packaging. While working on in small and large pieces. So I was both doing a design specifically for the thing that was my publication, but also for a generalized design that could be used on all of them. And the black and white and red design of the package on in small and large pieces was intended to match the very limited color palette one could have in a market where pretty much everybody had black. I mean, if people had the usual Macs, they had black pixels and they had white pixels. And if they had something fancier than that, they might have grayscale. Or they might have the sort of pale pastel colors of the early Mac laptops. It got better faster. I mean, what happened shortly thereafter is that computers and laptops got a lot more colorful. And what the CD-ROM revolution was about, from my perspective, was the entertainment industry deciding that computer entertainment should be as much like television as possible. So I was working with production standards with kind of the book in mind, working with a very limited range of colors and pixels and all of that we had. Movie studios were buying book companies and so on, and they have these multimedia divisions that were spending $500,000 on CD-ROMs, and doing electronic books with huge production budgets. So we are right before the, oh, there's another important dividing line here is, this is pre-web hypertext mostly. I mean, when I say mostly, I mean that the World Wide Web did exist. There's just not very many people used it. And while I was touring within small and large pieces, we went from a situation where every time I demonstrated it, I needed to explain what hypertext was and what clicking on a link was and things like that. So there was I'm going to tell you how this works, and it works the way I say it does, and the aesthetic is what I say it is. And there was a sort of sea change that happened. What the links here are like is they're digressive. Some of them will give you like the structure of a book, and you click on chapter 1, you get a chapter 1, right? But 90% of them are quite anarchic and synaptic and associative, not, I mean, when you click on something in an article in the New York Times now, if it says, Paris, you expect to go to an article about Paris. Whereas this may take you someplace completely different. I mean, there is an association, but it might be very elliptical. And it became much harder to get the audience to go along with the elliptical nature of the links once they all thought they knew what hypertext links were like. And so there was a big shift in two different ways. One was the rise of the World Wide Web and the underlying, and it taught the audience not the lesson I would have wanted them to learn about what links were supposed to be like. I had what I thought was a better idea. And particularly a much more useful literary concept. And so I continued to evangelize for, no, you can do links like this, it's really fine. And that carried over into my early blogging, where the links, I did very heavily linked blog posts with a lot of associative links rather than sort of informative links.
May I ask a question about the transfer from floppy disk to CD-ROM? Because Shelley I had done a pretty in-depth study of Michael Joyce's works last summer, where I versioned 13 versions of his work. And I noticed a huge difference between the floppy disk versions and the CD-ROM. And we noticed this also with Shelley Jackson when she came to the lab to read Patchwork Girl. She did not really recognize the mapping strategy anymore. So I don't have a copy of the CD-ROM version of this work that you've done. Are there any differences that you can tell us about that would reflect a difference in format?
I have no idea. I have never seen a CD-ROM version of it. But associatively, though, I will tell you that I did sign an additional contract with Eastgate. And it was for a work called Subpoena Vacation, which is about somebody who decides to duck a subpoena by going to Cape Cod on vacation. And I did a fair amount of work on it. The problem was we were already into the CD-ROM era, where there were a lot more expectations about color and photography and sort of filmic kind of aesthetics being brought to digital content. And that made it much more labor intensive and potentially much more expensive. It made the document bigger, etc. And I was still going to lose the battle against the things that cost $500,000. I mean, the competition at that point suddenly became missed. And there is what an individual author can do with a reasonable piece of their lifetime. And then there's what a production company can do. And those are very different things. And there was a big push to make the electronic book this glossy thing that could reach a much wider audience. And it didn't work. Publishing companies and other companies that got involved with that lost money hand over fist. But it changed the audience's expectations, so you really couldn't go back out within Small and Large Pieces. I couldn't just write a sequel to Small and Large Pieces. I had to engage with the new production standards. And so I got kind of bogged down in the swamp of trying to meet the production standard expectations while also being an individual and knowing that I was not going to earn any money on this, or tiny little, $25 here and there. and eventually, I never finished it. But it has some really lovely bits.
Do you still have it?
So that's part of what that change was about. Now, in terms of how Mark adapted them when they went on the CD-ROM format, I don't know. I have not seen the CD-ROM adaptations of any of the Eastgate products that I can recall. So I don't know what is Mark doing things differently, and what might be the authors doing things differently, and what might be the. I mean, there's also a screen resolution thing. I mean.
Well, Kathryn, what I noticed in this was 3 major demarcations in the works, at least with Michael Joyce's and Shelley Jackson's, because we have their work all the way to 2014, right?
Yeah, I can't quite hear you. Can you speak?
There was a major demarcation in 3 different ones in the work of Michael Joyce's and Shelley Jackson's, and they relied on the different media formats going, jumping from floppy to CD-ROM. Another change was when it went from Mac to Windows. And the third change was when it went from system, below system, the classic system to system 10.5 and above. When those 3 things happened, there were major shifts in the work that changed it substantially. And some of this was being driven by the design, for example, moving the toolbar into the menu bar. So the toolbar disappears in the CD-ROM version and goes into a menu bar at the top, which becomes very remediated from the web environment, right? So the web impacted the way story space looks.
Yeah, it probably almost certainly did.
It's a
And there was
remediation.
pressure from the audience, from even in small large pieces, to make it more like the web.
Absolutely.
So I think that if Mark changed the interface, it's very likely it was in response to audience expectations about how this should work.
Mm-hmm.
I spent about a year trying to figure out how to get working professional novelists to write in the kind of medium I thought we were exploring at the point where I worked at Eastgate and was working on small large pieces. And there was not really, the problem is that novelists had contracts, they had schedules, they had mortgages, and so on. And so it really wasn't possible to get them to take the time off from a publishing schedule to do that. And without people with established track records willing to put themselves out for this form in that way, it was hard to get traction into a wider readership.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know, I'm not privy to other people's sales figures, but so I mean, who knows? Other people may have made a fortune on hypertext fiction, but probably not. But I was trying to find a way to bring it to more like the economics of the science fiction field. But a lot of people would have good conversations about this, and some people even did things about it. But really, there wasn't a possibility to make a transaction or a transition into the commercial fiction publishing model that I was accustomed to. I mean, we haven't talked about it very much, but I'm an anthologist who, I think by this point has edited about 30 anthologies, and I had a great big book called The Ascent of Wonder come out the same year. So when I was driving across the country promoting hypertext, I was on the one hand promoting in small and large pieces, and on the other hand promoting a 1,000-page anthology of hard science fiction, which has, shall we say, a very different aesthetic. So I had sort of a actual science fiction career, and then I had this sort of, I'm going off to join the Eastgate Circus career going simultaneously. And I wanted to make a bridge there that would make it safe for, the writers, the best writers I knew that I liked to work with, to work in this medium. And I couldn't make it happen. I mean, I spent about a year at it and talked to people who did venture capital, and I mean, it was a really weird time because it was electronic things were hot. And so, I mean, I remember having this conversation with Mark America.
Yeah.
Saying, he said, this guy wants me to fax me his business plan. Should I buy a fax machine? And so this was, this was, they knew things were going on. So, I mean, I kept having getting invited to conversations with people who had venture capital. And I would sit down and they would want to see my business plan. And I would write this out and figure, oh, yes, I could spend 2 years working, 18 hours a day, losing all of someone's money. And at a certain time, having gone through this exercise enough time, I thought, I should get a job. And so instead of going back to Eastgate or doing something else, I went to work for Sunburst Communications, which was an educational software company, which was kind of a soul-destroying experience. I mean, one of the things that happened at that point is that we suddenly had these marketable skills in addition to venture capitalists wanting to talk to us. And so a lot of the people suddenly evaporated from the sort of anarchic hypertext scene into actual jobs.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people.
Well, I think what's interesting is if you look at what EA tried to do with Dish's Amnesia and Doug Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the to the Universe, to the Galaxy, and then you have Mark Bernstein's Eastgate, and then you have Voyager. None of them were successful in publishing literary type works for electronic media at the time. But without them, we would not be where we are today. So even though they did not last in terms of financial stability, they have endured in terms of what we have inherited from them. So it's an interesting thing to think about, this financial model that didn't work but then gave birth to this field, right?
Well, yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, some of the things where there would have been real barriers at the time to doing things differently, some of those barriers are gone. I mean, as I think I mentioned very early on, one of the things that people would tell me is no one can possibly understand something chopped up that way. They have to read in sentences and paragraphs and full stories and so on. And you can't just feed them chunks of things and expect them to synthetically figure it out. But we do that every day. I mean, the President of the United States did that. Mm-hmm. And he lost his Twitter account. And, it's just that perceived barrier that no one could possibly read in the digressive, anarchic way that I was asking them to read in small and large pieces. That barrier's gone. Another barrier that's gone now is that there was no way to easily redo in small and large pieces at the time into some other format or medium that might be more easily consumed. I mean, yeah, I gather there is a Cd-Rom version of in small and large pieces, but that took a while. But now, with XML and one thing or another, and knowing a few Digital Futures recent graduates from design school or something like that, I've actually been contemplating maybe doing I was contemplating at the point where it was the 25th anniversary, doing a 25th anniversary of in small and large pieces, but another year or so has gone by since then. But that's not out of the question. But there was no easy way early on to transition to another more easily distributed medium.
Can I tell you what we're doing?
Why don't we just make it a website? It would have been so labor intensive.
What we're doing for Holton, so Richard Holton got his contract back from Mark, and the lab is building 2 versions of it. We're doing, both of them are open source free versions. One is going to be just the foundation on the web with HTML5 and CSS and a few little JavaScript modals. But on top of that, the second version of it is going to be a scholarly edition where we actually have critical commentary throughout the work so that people can understand what acid is, for example, what Finhorn was, what a can of Spam meant. And so all of these, what the Mechanical Pig was based on, who veut changer is based on. So, all of those various cultural moments in the text, as well as the intellectual critical commentary about the work itself. And so we're building that as we speak, and we're delivering it.
The decision I would make within small and large pieces is I would preserve most of the look and feel, but I would add an audio, and I would read it aloud, and I would have different modalities of reading it based on how you got there. So I would enunciate what I was saying differently for how you got there is kind of what I was thinking of. I mean, trying to upgrade it is different. I mean, but the other thing that you're talking about in terms of the like contextuality and the adding, you know, a richness of texture and being able to know what things were and so on. I mean, Werner Vinge did a hypertextual version of one of his novels where he put in essentially all the research that is usually left out. And many, many years ago, I read an essay called Science Fiction and the Adventures of the Spherical Cow, which is about how science fiction basically is a literature in relationship to the sciences, and the sciences have like math as the skeleton that holds up the animal. And science fiction, pretty much by definition, because of the conventions of fiction, takes those bones out. You can't have that in the story. It can only be implicit. And what Vinge was using it for at that moment was to bring in all the things that you're not allowed to put in your novel and putting them in there where the reader can get at them, because that is what he, as the author, would prefer. And there is a whole path not taken that I saw for professional novelists, where they could have the freedom to put in the things that they felt should be in their books, that their publishers would not let them put in their books, both because of length and the conventions of the novel. And some of those paths not taken are now much more possible than they were once the future of the book that we were exploring in the mid-90s was foreclosed. I mean, a lot of the possibilities that I saw and we talked about in the mid-90s went away, but they could come back now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the time, and I'd suggest that we turn to the chat in our last of 8 to 10 minutes and try to cover at least some of the questions that people asked there. I recall one from Richard Snyder, who asks, you know, when you were talking about the poetry basement, and he wonders whether this is the only place that those poems were published.
Yes. I mean, I have professionally published poetry later, but none of these were commercially published. In Small and Large Creases was the first time that these poems were published.
That's great. Yeah. Is that Mariusz?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a gothic story, and it brings this claustrophobic feel to the reader, just like Afternoon a Story, which also has this claustrophobic aura around it. Is this why you decided to not bring a story space map with the work?
I had a life in commercial fiction, and I also did desktop publishing and so on. And so I thought of the composition environment as very different from the reading environment. And this is what the face I chose to represent to the world because of my own aesthetic of what the electronic book should be like. Is I think the best answer I have. It's not so much, I enjoyed Story Space enough to spend a year and a half inside building this, but I didn't do it in order to show you the inside of Story Space. I showed what I wanted to show. So, I mean, there is a way in which, I don't let you in there, but it's not, I think you're supposed to experience that via the fragments rather than by being given a map. And in as much as I gave you a map in terms of, okay, here's a table of contents, here's another table of contents, here's even a link to the poetry collection. So there are, as I say, conventions of the book there for navigation, so I didn't unlock the inner parts of it. Although I certainly could have.
Would you also tell us more about your time in Eastgate? Because your name is mentioned quite a few times by authors who did Traversals with us as some sort of quite an influential, informative factor. How did your work at Eastgate look like?
Well, the history of it is that I was initially brought to Eastgate Systems by Sarah Smith, who wanted David Hartwell and I to publish an article on hypertext fiction in the New York Review of Science Fiction. And we were teaching science fiction writing at Harvard Summer School at the time, so we were in Cambridge. And we came over to the Eastgate offices, and Mark showed us Story Space and demoed things and so on. And we thought, oh yes, this is all very interesting. We will publish your article. But I said, but I want that. And so he gave me a copy of Story Space, and I took it home. And then I spent 8 months working on this while I was working. I think I was working for a couple of literary agencies. There were agents who had their offices across the hall from each other, and I also was in German literature graduate school. So I guess there's a whole other layer that I haven't even talked about, that I didn't particularly think about at the time while I was writing it, of German Romanticism that underpins this. I mean, Der blonde Eckbart, I remember writing a lot about that, and I mean, there's that moment in the Der blonde Eckbart where by Tieck, where the woman who has stolen the magic bird that lays jeweled eggs kills it because it cries too much. And it's sort of this kind of German romanticism aesthetic of this kind of brutal surrealism, I think also underpins it. I didn't think of it as being in the tradition of German romanticism when I wrote it, but that's what I was studying in graduate school, at least when they would let me do what I wanted, right before I went to work for Eastgate. And I got disgusted with him and, dropped out of German literature graduate school and moved to Boston and joined Mark's circus. And, and it was like, there was a little clique of us who all lived were living on less than $15,000 a year in places that did not have doors. And I hung around a lot with Tom Meyer, who did the Hypertext Hotel Moo, and Mary Lou Jepson, who is now quite famous for other reasons. We just sort of, we would relate intensely about speculative things having to do with technology. I would drive down to Brown and hang out with Mary Lou and Tom a lot. And it was a really exciting time, but there are certain kinds of realities that happened. I mean, one of the reasons I left was the basement I was living in, where my room had no door, had a fire in the house, and so the whole house smelled like smoke, and I discovered that I had a phobia of smoke, and it was giving me nightmares, and so I decided I would go back to New York. But it was a wild adventure, and so I dropped out of German Lit graduate school and joined the circus and did it for a while. But I mean, I was bringing actual kind of like New Yorkish, this is how a book is published. This is how we edit a book. This is, so I wasn't so much, and I also went out and promoted it. I mean, as I say, I drove across the country, I went to science fiction conventions, and so I was somewhat messianic. One thing I didn't do, which is kind of puzzling given what it's sort of surprising to me in retrospect, is a lot of people wrote long essays about hypertext, and I mostly didn't write essays about it. I would go out and show people. I would try to convince bookstore owners that these were books and things like that. But I didn't write essays about it much. I don't think I completely refrained, and I'm not really sure why I didn't.
Kathryn, can I say that Mark credits you for bringing order to his editorial process?
Oh,
he
yes.
does. He does. He says he really did rely heavily on your talent and skills to understand how to really run an editorial process.
Right. Yeah. I mean, essentially, yes. I'd worked in publishing, and I also had been mentored by David Hartwell, whom I later married. And we also had run a small press magazine, the New York Review of Science Fiction. And I was nominated for the Hugo Award a bunch of times for working on the New York Review of Science Fiction. But so I had a certain kind of like, this is how things are published sensibility that I brought to it, while at the same time wanting the stuff we were publishing to be at least as anarchic as we were doing already, if not more so. So I wasn't trying to take the fun out of it. I was just trying to make it more like something that was the kind of thing that gets published.
Well, Kathryn, I'm not sure whether you know, but Sarah Smith is here as well, right? She's been contributing to the chat as well. So, you know, quite a large crowd of Mark Circus are here, which is amazing. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Officially, our time is up. So I'm asking Dini whether this is the time, this is the point when we should wrap up, or is there anything else you would like to say or anyone else would like to say in this group? I mean, I think I had a fantastic time. I want to thank Kathryn so much for doing this with us, for taking her time, because it's not just doing the actual reading and traversal, it's preparing for it, it's trying to remember and dig in, you know, in one's memory for all these traces and texts and so on. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much, Kathryn.
Yeah, I guess if there's one thing I would like to leave people with, that while these things are roads not taken in terms of how electronic books are and how an electronic literature is, it's not too late. And a lot of the reasons why we didn't carry on then, a lot of the obstacles are gone.
Yes.
I want to thank you, Kathryn, for coming today. It means a lot, and as you know, I'm trying to document all of the 48 titles of Eastgate Systems publications that I own all 48, and I'm trying to get them documented because they're all on floppy disks, you know, and that's a pretty fragile format. So to get all this work done and to have the artists to be able to participate and talk about their work. We've had Dina Larson here. We've worked with Sarah Smith. A lot of the folks that you know and you've worked with yourself. So it makes a difference for future audiences to be able to see you, hear you, and hear your thoughts about the production of this wonderful work. I thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
And I hope many people will get to read it because it is amazing. It's so suspenseful and exciting to read and fun. I can warmly recommend it.
So we have John and I.
There's a lot more grim stuff in there.
Yeah.
We didn't even get to.
Anyone who wants to know more is welcome to send comments to any of us, Mariusz or Astrid or Kathryn or me. We'll send you information that we have. You're also invited to come to the lab post-COVID and spend some time with this work. You're more than welcome to.
And also, Eastgate will sell you stuff.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Big shout out to Mark as well.
Shout out to Mark Bernstein.
And everyone else, Diane and so on. So thank you again, everyone, and hope to see you very soon. We have further traversals lined up this spring, Kathy Mack and Richard Smith, and so yeah, there's lots more coming up. So watch this space and keep following updates from the Electronic Literature Lab for the exact dates.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Okay.